Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 4th of February 2016, just after 1 o'clock, and welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, the weather, we've got some interesting reports. Glasgow is apparently dry and overcast, so well done the Scots. Rhondda and Pembrokeshire sunny. Brighton is sunny, but it's overcast and a bit grey in London. And Devon is, well, Plymouth at least, overcast, a bit mizzy and generally cold. Dog walkers complaining they've got to use towels to wipe off their hounds. So there we are. What more can we say? Subject for today is David Cameron's favourite policy, which is war, causing war, assisting war, and that'll be accompanied by an in-depth look at propaganda by the BBC.
Yes, so we're going to begin with, our illustrious leader, King David, who tweeted this out today. If ever there was a moment to take a new approach to the humanitarian crisis in Syria, surely it's now. Well, we might agree with that. But we've got a suggestion for David Cameron. How about he gets behind Syria and Russia and roots out the terrorists that he's been funding and supplying for the last several years? And in fact, why not start by ending that funding and those supplies, and maybe that would solve the humanitarian crisis quite nicely in Syria, and people could start to rebuild. That would certainly be a new approach. Of course, David Cameron was tweeting this out today because of the Support Syria conference, which he opened this morning. Here's the website, and you'll see that they're using the hashtag Support Syrians. So what if we don't support this conference and we don't support this policy agenda, then we're not supporting Syrians apparently, but there you go. Well done, Dave. Your propaganda in full swing, I see. So here is some of the propaganda in its purest form, supporting Syria and the region. London 2016, on the 4th of February 2016, the UK, Germany, Kuwait, Norway and the United Nations will co-host a conference on the Syria crisis in London, and the first aim that they mention is new funding to meet the immediate and longer term needs of those affected by the crisis. And of course they're focusing on things like education. David Cameron can't educate anyone in this country, but apparently we're going to educate people in Syria, so that's good. So he has already announced, in fact, this morning, an extra £1.2 billion of international aid for Syria and the region to help fund education, create jobs, and for humanitarian protection, apparently. So the current funding level is 1.12 billion. That's going to be more than doubled, and the money is going to be invested over the next 4 years, and as I say, to help fund education, jobs, humanitarian protection in Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey. So Cameron's what they've said is that the Supporting Syria and Region conference will be co-hosted by the UK. Alongside those other nations, and they aim to raise billions of dollars for that. So that's all great stuff. This is pretty much, this was him this morning, opening the conference. He's looking particularly fetching there. But the conference I'm hosting today is about more than just money, he said. Our new approach of using fundraising to build stability, create jobs, and provide education can have a transformational effect.
Yeah, there's
the word once again.
Yeah.
So 2.3 billion in UK aid, he says, sets the standard for the international community. More money is needed to tackle the crisis, and it's needed now. But the conference I'm hosting today is about more than just money, and so on.
They're panicking, Mike, aren't they?
They are absolutely panicking because this is the new approach they need. They recognise they've been completely outflanked by Syria and Russia, and so this is their new approach. What are they going to do? They're going to flood the entire region with NGOs and use their soft power to try to transform.
Change agents is what they're going to put in, and it'll all be done on we're only there to help the children, just like they're helping the children in UK by covering up the child abuse. They're going to be helping millions of children in Syria. I notice it says the region, Mike. So yes. there's the nudge towards the fact this isn't really a country. It's only part of David Cameron's forthcoming region for the
Indeed. You mentioned that we'll be talking about the Ministry of Truth later on, and here they are. They have published a new article in time for this conference called Syria, the Story of the Conflict. you know, if you've got any confusion about what actually happened in the last several years, clearly this article is the place to go.
Go to the BBC.
Go
Truth
to the BBC,
at all times.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, it's the usual tissue of lies that we've come to expect from the Foreign Office. But anyway, of course, in parallel with the conference, the peace talks have been going on in Geneva, except they're not anymore because the peace talks have been suspended today. And why might that be? Well, they can't have the peace talks and the conference competing for news time. So the peace talks, which are less important, of course, have to be suspended. It's okay, though, because they will resume on the 25th of February once the Supporting Syria conference has achieved the news coverage it needs. But in the meantime, it's naturally because Russia and Syria are just being too successful. Sorry.
Well, I was just picking up on the headline on that one. The UN halts Syria talks as government closes in on Aleppo. So the headline itself is it's the government that is closing, not the government is liberating, or the government is
no, that's right,
is closing in those nasty Syrians.
Yeah,
Syrians under Assad.
Yeah, absolutely, and the Russians being too successful at what they're doing. And in fact, Kerry has apparently come out and sort of reinforced that by saying that Russia needs to halt the bombing in Syria until the peace talks resume. So they're
stop bombing the terrorists,
yes,
so that we can continue the peace talk. There's something wrong there, isn't there?
There is something very wrong there. So, at least one Italian lady in Rome is not so impressed with this position. I don't think that's a genuine. I think this is
photoshopped.
Well.
Or has he had a night out with David Cameron?
Well,
maybe
possibly.
That's the bit of bad pig there.
Yes, maybe. So this was a press conference in Rome, and this lady basically attempted to point out to Mr. Kerry that he was full of nonsense, really, because she pointed out to him that it was you that created ISIS in the first place. So she was bundled out of the press conference by the police
for telling the truth.
So what they had intended to do was to take some banners in. They were a small group of global coalition against ISIS, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, USA, UK, France, UAE, Italy. The plan was to allow them. I've had this sent to me by Vanessa Beeley, so I'm just going to read this. The plan was to show the media, a huge number of international and local media, that Kerry carry some banners which said "ISIS, son of your wars, your money, your weapons," and then another one saying "Libya, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, your victims," and so on. But the police intervened, and she attempted to make the point by reaching for Mr. Kerry and suggesting that he created ISIS in the first place. So well done to her.
Did that make national news at all, Mike? Do you know?
It hasn't really made any news, actually. No. Russian news, as I showed a second ago, but it certainly hasn't made any Western news. But perhaps it's this kind of situation which is making people nervous, because this is a spectacular article in the Financial Times by Martin Wolf, saying that we've got to bring our elites closer to the people. So I think they know the game's up here, Brian, and they really are expressing fear. Bring our elites closer to the people. He says, I'm going to ask, is this a new version of the Hagahoudi campaign? We've seen it from George Osborne and Mark Carney that we've got to love the bank. We've got to love some bankers, but now we've got to bring the elites closer to the people. Perhaps the best way might be to share a bit more, or maybe stop bombing every country on the planet. That might help.
I don't think I want any of these people close to me, especially Mr. Cameron after he's been messing around with pigs.
Well, perhaps. Martin Wolf in the subheading here saying, one of the causes of disquiet is the sense that those at the top are corrupt, complacent and incompetent.
Very interesting, that particular comment, Mike, because a little while ago I was having a conversation with a gentleman, of course, was reminding me that I think it was a chairman of Tory party in somewhere around David Cameron's constituent who produced a report saying this was exactly the problem, that they were out of touch, perceived as being ignorant, arrogant, and into all sorts of activities. He ended up dead in a porter cabin at pop festival, I think.
Yes. Well, Martin Wolf went on to say in his the opening paragraph here, in the opening contest of the 2016 race for the White House, Ted Cruz, a Republican candidate described as a mountebank, has upstaged Donald Trump, a narcissist. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders, a self-proclaimed democratic socialist, more or less tied with establishment favourite Hillary Clinton. So the rebellion against the elite is in full swing. The vital question is whether and how Western elites can be brought closer to the people. So I would say answers on a postcard for that one.
Okay.
Yes.
I was about to say something naughty about rope.
Yes,
but I'm probably not allowed to say that.
It's cheap.
I can think it though. Still.
Yes. Okay, change of subject. Saw this morning and I thought I'd just bring it to everybody's attention. Urgent, Cameron Parkin, age 16, from Stockton, missing. And it says here, police are appealing to trace missing 16-year-old Cameron Parkin, who was last seen at an address on Ketting Road in Hardick, Stockton, around 1:30 on Monday the 1st. He's described as white, of slim build, around 5'9", fair complexion, short red hair, and was wearing dark grey Adidas tracksuit and blue Nike trainers. They're obviously asking for assistance to help him. Call Cleveland Police on 101 if you've got any notion of where this young lad is. But I wanted to highlight something that I posted to my Facebook page the other day, which was with regard to Tim Farron MP's call to have unaccompanied children from Syria brought to the UK. And I just wanted to read out a couple of the statistics that I mentioned in this. And the statistics are sourced, so you can go and look for yourself. But basically what I said was that made the point that in 2010, the Home Office estimated that around 140,000 children go missing in the UK each year. And while I applaud appeals for information on individual missing children, there's no indication in the media about the scale of this problem, how many children go missing in this country every year. Now, so that's 140,000 children going missing in the UK each year. Most of them, of course, are returned home or are found, but not all. And in fact, nobody knows how many just disappear. Now, in 2012, there was an all-party parliamentary group for runaway and missing children and adults, and the all-party parliamentary group for looked after children and care leavers. They issued a report, and there's a link to the report there. And that was following an inquiry that they held into missing children. The inquiry was co-chaired by Anne Coffrey MP and by the Earl of Listowel. And the foreword of that report says it all. There is a scandal going on in England involving children missing from care, and they were specifically talking about children missing from care. And until recent cases of child sexual abuse in Rochdale and other places put the spotlight on this issue, it was going on pretty much unnoticed. So according to their report, there are 68,000 children in care in the UK, and the report says that the local authority with responsibility for a child is required to report on whether they have run away for more than 24 hours to the Department of Education once a year. Data for 2011 shows that 930 individual children went missing. Using this measure of going missing for over 24 hours, police figures suggest 17,000 incidents and 5,000 individual children going missing from care each year. Now, how many of these children return? Nobody really knows. The report says there are also major problems with quality of data collected on trafficked children. The numbers recorded by CEOP, approximately 300 between 2007 and 2010, is widely thought to be the very tip of the iceberg, and the lack of robust and comprehensive data was also identified by the inquiry as a key obstacle to keeping children safe. So I think you would agree, Brian, that as we've looked at this issue over the years, it is the fact that no one knows that is really the most staggering aspect of this, isn't it?
I'll say coupled with the fact that the authorities don't want to know, because when you ask the key question, well, how many children? Well, we don't know. And then you say, well, why is that? It all goes strangely silent. We're talking about a vast number of children. They want to keep the lid on the number because the scale of it would, of course, should be a national scandal, which would mean it's impossible to cover it up. But you lie over the figures, therefore you can keep the lid on the abuse. And I'll just add to that we were contacted very, very recently by a policeman telling us again about the scale of the threats and abuse and intimidation being handed out not only by the Metropolitan Police but other police districts in England against men and women, police officers, policemen, policewomen who speak out on the subject of abuse and the cover-up of abuse by senior police officers. So it's getting quite interesting now, Mike. It's not the odd one or two. We know that the numbers of police brave enough to speak out is growing, and the story is always the same when they break the truth about the police covering up for politicians and members of the establishment and senior police officers themselves. Then those more junior police are threatened, and that is the word. Some of them have succumbed and have committed suicide, but we will have more information on this over the coming weeks. Well, we're certainly not going to rely on the BBC to be telling us the truth about what's happening to the children. Have a look at this. A lot of people pointed us at this and said, we can't believe it. This is a BBC Two programme all about the lead up to World War III, effectively, and the debate over this in a supposed war gaming scenario. But there is some just unbelievable propaganda the whole way through this BBC activity. It is scandalous, it's outrageous that public money should be used to support this. And I think people today are going to be astonished when you look at the calibre of the people that have produced this very dangerous propaganda. So one of the key images on screen at the moment, and it's pretty ugly stuff, isn't it? We've got a skinhead thug, but of course, what is all this pinned against? Well, it's pinned against Russia, and the objective is to fix the bad guy image as being Russia into people's minds. This is very carefully constructed in order to really mess around with people's minds. It's vicious propaganda, and for the BBC to be doing it with our money is outrageous. Well, if you step through this, it effectively takes you step by step through a scenario. So it's a war game. Britain and NATO regularly simulate war games against hypothetical opponents so that they're ready for crises that arise in the real world. Well, that's a true statement. Notice that hypothetical is put in inverted commas. Of course, when NATO does this sort of thing, well, certainly in the times that I was part of that organisation, you simply talked about reds and blues. The reds were always the bad guys and the blues were the good guys. So a scenario was played out, but NATO was actually very careful not to be directly accusing nation states. Well, let's add a bit to that one here, because we've already seen that although they say what Britain and NATO regularly do, which is hypothetical opponents, the BBC has immediately attempted to pin Russia in this scenario, and it leads you through a very carefully crafted BBC scenario that you are going to agree with the BBC's outcome. So what do? Well, they take you into a sort of war cabinet. There's bits of film and other things in this. More here. Britain is a member of NATO, which is an alliance of 28 countries. According to the Article 5, an attack against one is considered an attack against them all. This is known as collective defence. So here we are, gently priming the public that the reality is that the good guy is NATO and the bad guy is Russia.
Right. See, there's a very interesting disparity between the BBC text and the text that you've just put on the screen, and that is that NATO has a capital N, and the rest of the letters are small. NATO is an acronym. Yes. And in English, acronyms have capital letters. So even within that one word, there's propaganda going on there.
Well, I think this thing is some of the most powerful propaganda I've seen the BBC pushing out, and I think it's another sign of desperation, Mike. The significance of the red hand is on the website. You can actually click the hand, and it will take you further into the thing. Obviously, we can only show part of it in analysing it. So here's another page. It says situation in this imagined situation, ethnic Russians, who make up a quarter of the population in Estonia, gather at a Russian war memorial after violent confrontations with the police. 22 are arrested, including 6 Russians. Russia demands their release. Trouble spills into Latvia, where thousands of ethnic Russians take to the streets in protest. And Russia, surprisingly, is accused of stirring up the protest. What should we do? Well, who do we go for advice? Admiral Lord West. And what does he do? He immediately rips into Putin. We've seen what Putin did in Ukraine. We've warned him not to do that with the Baltic states. He wants a sphere of influence. We need NATO ground forces in Estonia. So Lord West ripping into the Russians. Let's have a look at this former admiral. Here he is exposed by the Daily Mail, having a little party, dressed as a pirate and playing literally with ABBA. This is put across as all serious reality, and we should take the words of Lord West seriously. Well, I don't think we should take his words seriously at all, because he's not credible. He's no longer credible. But the whole thing, this isn't hypothetical. This is absolutely based against Russia. This is another part of it. Here it says, so I brought in the hypothetical bit there just to emphasize that. And we'll stress the bit at the top. It isn't hypothetical. It's about Russia. So what's going on here? We're starting to mix fact and fiction. People being drawn deeper into this, and now we're into real nations that, as we've said here, just happen to be at the forefront of Cameron's latest warmongering policies in Eastern Europe. So when you press the buttons, what happened? Well, it starts to run through the scenario. Click the hand to see how the crisis develops. When you click the hand, what it tells you is this, that there's a rebel surge, that there's a border crisis, 2 missiles get fired and 4 warships get hit. And we just like to say, never mind the propaganda in those 4 pictures. Let's just remember that the ship down here is HMS Ocean, that is going to be scrapped. So the BBC is pushing across. Here's a powerful British warship at sea going to fight those nasty Russians, when the reality is that the ship is going to be scrapped. But the BBC doesn't want to ask any questions about this. So we got the public mind nudged into believing that Britain's military is secure and capable, when the truth is the exact opposite. So here's more, just in case you haven't picked up the propaganda. We've got a whole screed here on the real life scenario. Although analysts regularly game the situation, it goes on to talk about Syria and how dangerous it is, because those nasty Russians are now flying their planes amongst the British and American. That's extremely naughty of them, Mike, because David Cameron's obviously upset about that. And of course, the Russians want to take over the whole of the Middle East, and the BBC making sure that we know what reality is. So the real life scenario here is actually based on reality mixed with propaganda. It's so in your face, it's almost difficult to know how to pull this apart. And then, of course, it leads you through to the really serious stuff. So do we press the red button? If the US fires a nuclear weapon at a Russian military target, and the Russians have fired a nuclear missile on London, what do we tell our Trident commanders? This was the sort of result. We got a fire, don't fire, fire. And the lady at the end, Faulkner, said don't fire as well. What is this about? Well, I think this is about the fact that at the moment, the policy is to strip Britain of an independent nuclear deterrent. The BBC and the Guardian newspaper have been ramming this home. And significantly, the agenda is don't fire. And the reason I think this is so significant is that they're nudging the public in this game to believe that Trident is ineffective as a nuclear deterrent and would not in any case be used. And I say the deeper subliminal message is, so scrap it. So this stuff is just outrageous. I think it shows they're utterly desperate, Mike. that they can't control the amount of information coming out to the public at the moment. So just so that we don't let the BBC get away with anything, this is what the BBC can't report on, that the Type 45 destroyers, supposedly, according to the BBC, the most advanced anti-aircraft warship of its kind, except it doesn't work because the power keeps failing, which makes it totally unreliable and useless. They're having to put them alongside. And of course, the crews can't repair at sea because the contracts are all still with British Aerospace. So the BBC can't investigate that properly. It can't point out the dangers of scrapping HMS Ocean, but you can wind the whole thing into fiction around those nasty Russians. So the cheeky bit is, of course, that the BBC accuses Russia of subversive destabilisation of nation states. But this is the very action that the BBC's charity, BBC Media Action, boasts of doing for real. And we just pull out some old UK column reports. Go and have a look at BBC Media Action's website. They say they're going to get involved throughout the world to help millions of people change, Mike. The BBC, full of corruption, paedophilia, lies, where can I go, is going to work throughout the world to make it a better place. So this is the sort of thing that this charity is going to do. It's going to work on governance and rights in the Middle East, the former Soviet Union and Europe. So the BBC is going to help people have a proper system of governance and rights. Presumably that'll include paedophilia and corruption. In Afghanistan, the process of establishing an independent Afghan organisation, it's independent, but it's staffed by former BBC Media Action employees. This could be a cartoon if it wasn't actually real. Elsewhere in Asia, governance-related projects include Loi 9 in Cambodia. So here we've got BBC Media Action working worldwide to change the governments in place. And this lady says it all, Juliet Harkin, who was formerly a project manager. She said, we, BBC Media Action, worked in 2004 with individuals within the ministry who wanted change and tried to get them to be the drivers of that. All media development work that has been done in Syria has, in my opinion, been predicated upon this idea that there can be change from within. You have an authoritarian regime and you can find who the reformers are within that and you work with them. This is the BBC subverting the Syrian government.
It's actually the Foreign Office at work, isn't it?
It's the Foreign Office because funding comes in to Media Action, but of course the biggest lie is Media Action says we're a charity, we're independent of the BBC, we just use their pension pot and offices. So we put the detail on the UK column website. Have a look at this, BBC Media Action, subversion from broadcasting house to Kazakhstan. And of course we're not the only people saying that the BBC is a totally untrustworthy organisation. Here's the article where they were faking wildlife shots and claiming that their excellent teams were out filming the reality. This was another one. BBC made youths put up hoods to make his state look worse in a panorama documentary. So that's low-grade stuff. But this takes the biscuit because when Russia Today printed that the BBC was faking, this was the 2013 documentary called Saving Syria's Children. We've looked at that, of course, Mike, lots to be challenged. Well, the Russians, Russia Today said, well, we're not having this, and started to criticise the BBC. What did the BBC do? Went running to Ofcom. And down at the bottom, Ofcom then tells off Russia Today, makes them print an apology, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting that the person mentioned in that, Robert Stewart, has just recently put in a Freedom of Information request with a whole bunch of questions about saving Syria's children. And this is one of the fascinating aspects of the Freedom of Information Act, is that if the BBC does something, makes an editorial decision, that falls outside the remit of the Freedom of Information Act. So when he did it, I knew what the response was going to be. A few days later, that is exactly the response that he's had. We don't need to reply to this because you're asking us questions about editorial decisions that we made, and we're not obliged to tell you about the editorial decisions that we make under the Freedom of Information Act. So Robert Stewart is doing absolutely fantastic work on saving Syria's children. He will not let that go, and we'll do our best to support him with that as well.
Okay, well, we can add a bit more to this, and it gets worse. Thanks to the Radio Times, we got a bit more of an insight into what this programme really was. The worst has happened. Russia is fomenting unrest in the Baltic states. After the Crimea, President Putin turns his attention to Latvia. NATO becomes increasingly twitchy and anxious. What should it do? And it goes on, it says, footage of a major war game with a committee of senior military, political and diplomatic figures as they confront a hypothetical hot war in Eastern Europe. Well, it's not hypothetical, this is it's not hypothetical. The programme faces a scenario that has haunted Western strategists since civil war broke out in the Ukraine. So it's all civil war, nothing to do with BBC Media Action, of course. Well, who would produce a programme like this? Well, thank you, Radio Times, because there they are. We've got Gabriel Range, Sam Bagnall, and a Sarah Waldron. Well, we thought we'd just have a look at the two top ones. So here's Gabriel. Go to his Twitter page. And what does he say about himself? Well, he says he's a writer-director. He makes films, slave film junkie, but he's a whiskey lover. Well, for you to advertise you like whiskey, I think you must really like whiskey. So I don't know whether he'd had a few. Let's just have a look at his Twitter page. It should scroll through, hopefully. Here we go, a little bit slow. But if you go through his tweets, advertising his film on war, advertising those nasty Russians in the Atlantic, advertising Sweden says there will be World War III. And he embeds a clip. American soldiers are going to go on the offensive against those nasty Russians. We need to get them out of Latvia. This is propaganda, Mike, that is just extraordinary. Film action, drama, sold to the public, I've said, as whiskey-induced reality. Yeah. It's mind-blowing, isn't it? And here he is. Well, this is the other one. This is Sam Bagnall. And what sort of man is Sam Bagnall? Well, he's the sort of man you go to for advice on World War III. This is how he sees himself. These people have been paid, Mike, to destroy the public's mind. And this is how he retweets Vladimir Putin. Yeah. I better stop, because otherwise I'm likely to say something about the BBC, which probably...
Get us into trouble.
Well, get into trouble, yeah.
Right. Finance then. Things not looking good there. Maybe this is one of the reasons why we're heading towards war. But here we have Handelsblatt here. And they're basically saying, Handelsblatt are saying that Deutsche Bank is in free fall. They're saying that, let's see, where am I? They're saying that the bank shares lost 1/3 of the value since the beginning of the year. And that's only since the beginning of February, actually. Annual loss of 6.8 billion euros for 2015. So Deutsche Bank in real trouble. Other people have been commenting on this as well. Financial Review, Deutsche Bank's troubles unmask bigger risks. So it's not just Deutsche Bank then. And they're saying that at the Deutsche Bank annual meeting in Frankfurt in 2015, a disgruntled investor got up in front of the microphone and asked the board of directors if there was a financial scandal the bank wasn't involved in. And this is because the bank earlier had been fined $2.5 billion by the US and Britain after an investigation for its part in the LIBOR rigging. And so it went on. Stock prices in Deutsche Bank collapsing and 6.8 billion euro losses, to say, last year. So Deutsche Bank in trouble, but it goes on because, of course, it's not just the banks, it's toxic loans and the world global financial system suffering as a result. It just continues. Moody's saying basically we're in for another round of sovereign debt write-downs. And of course, that's always what happens when we get close to a financial collapse, isn't it? The threat of sovereign default. And they're saying that the Caribbean region is the region which is most likely. It's one of the most indebted regions in the world, according to this report. They're saying Puerto Rico has $72 billion of debt, which is, and their bondholders are likely to receive a 45% haircut. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Jamaica, even more vulnerable, debt to GDP ratio of about 130%. I think we'll find Britain's debt to GDP ratio isn't so different. But they're talking about other sovereign debt problems, Antigua, Barbuda, Grenada, and so it goes on. But it's all about countries and not banks, apparently.
Okay, well, we can't be too nasty to those bankers. We have remembered, though, that Deutsche Bank, of course, was one of the banks giving Common Purpose a large amount of support. And of course, Chief Executive Julia Middleton said on one occasion that she admired those East German bankers. Lehman Brothers were another ones in Beyond Authority, a role model for school children. So well done. If you want to support the political charity Common Purpose, then they're rooting for the banks, who of course are creating all the international fraud and corruption and the hunger and the poverty that allows David Cameron to steal the children.
Yes.
Roughly. Okay, thank you very much for joining us. We will be back at the same time tomorrow. And a very big thank you to all of you who have donated or taken out subscriptions with the UK column. We can only do what we do with your support. Thanks very much. Back tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.